This is a special track for me because I created this career inside TDC a few years ago. I went to GDC in San Francisco, and on that particular year, all the seminars and all the talks on DDC were asked to ended up with what is the biggest lesson I learned with this stuff that I just presented. So it was amazing to see people like the guy that was manager for Final Fantasy, a project that took almost 4 years, and they need to change a lot of things. In the end, sharing his knowledge and his lessons with the audience. So I was on the plane back to Brazil, and then I thought, I know a lot of stories of speakers and people that I know from the community, but I know those histories because I had the opportunity to talk to people, to go to speakers' room, and this is something that helped me to grow my career, my mindset about the future and things like that. So at that time, I was working at Intel, and we host our own event inside TDC. Then I decided to build this career track to invite the people that I knew that had good stories, good lessons to share. I invited Bruno Souza to be the host with me, and the rest is history. So this is a special, very special track for me here at TDC. And talking about careers and the impact of open source, I'm now Director of Open Source and Developer Relations at Soup Innovation in Brazil. And I worked on Intel for 8 years with as a developer evangelist and technical evangelist in Latin America. But open source changed my mind when I started joining and hanging with the community and contributing in 2002. So my career changed completely. The world became a single place for me. I met people all over the world. I had the opportunity to travel to different countries, to work with open standards, to work with public policies, and also help people to start contributing and use technology and absorb technology. And this is what I want to share with you today here. If you had any questions, please just send here in the chat. Okay. So I really enjoy this sentence by Bill Joy. Bill Joy is one of the founders of Sun Microsystems. For the people that doesn't know, Sun, it's an acronym for Stanford University Network. So they created a company inside the University of Stanford, and Sun was only created because they already had open source. They implemented open source on their hardware from the very early beginning. And Bill Joy used to say this: no matter who you are, most of the smartest people work for someone else, which means that doesn't matter the size of your company, doesn't matter how much money you have. The probability that you have more smart people outside than inside is huge. So with that, it means that doesn't matter how big your company is, outside is always bigger than inside. So when you're talking about innovation, we can't just rely on our own ability or our own company's ability to innovate. What really matters in a connected, networkly connected ecosystem that we have in technology today is how is your ability to capture and appropriate innovation where it happens. So the probability that the next big thing will be over there inside instead of inside your company is huge. So how your company is strategically prepared to go there, capture this innovation and bring inside, and how you are as a developer, a professional, able to identify where innovation will happen, to go there, connect with the first spark of it, appropriate to yourself, and start delivering value through technology and innovation on this networked ecosystem. So the ability for companies and professionals to be really innovative, it's much more related with the ability to capture innovation wherever it happens and appropriate and apply it instead of only invest on your own innovation. Of course, we all need to innovate. We all need to create, and maybe we are the creators of the next big thing. But even if we are the creators of the next big thing, we will need a networked environment to make this scale and be available to people. And there's no better way of doing this in technology than using open source. And I'm working with open source, as I said, since 2002. I'm using open source since 1997 or 1998. And I really enjoy this sentence that Simon Phipps formulated. And he confessed me that it took 20 years to write this paragraph. And you understand why. It's open. If the work product can be used, improved, and shared for any purpose without obstruction or required negotiation. This sentence applies to open source, to open hardware, to open standards, to open wherever you think about. So the first part of the sentence is basically what the open source initiative is working on since it was created. But it's important to see that the use it, improve it, and share it for any purpose, they are exactly the four freedoms from Richard Stallman's Free Software Foundation. So it's an harmonization between both, with an additional point that you don't need to ask anyone. So if you want to learn more about these ideas of Simon Phipps on Zoop channels on YouTube, there is an interview, a Zoop Open Talks with him. There is a talk from him named No Need to Ask, and he explains the impact for this. And why it is important to make this clear to people today, because unfortunately, fortunately, people use open source since college nowadays. So I've met with developers that were started working 10, 15 years ago. They never use the proprietary software. They never use it even in college. So open source is all their lives, but they still believe that open source is free as in beer. And this is funny because on that early beginning of open source, we used to have a lot of discussions about philosophy, about economy, about all things related with the chain of value of software and how this impacts society, at the same time that we are coding and developing technology. Over the years, we stopped having those discussions. We stopped talking about all the things that were behind the biggest idea, and we just focused on coding. So people today believe that open source is anything in source code that I found on the internet, and this is not true. And you understand the impact of not knowing exactly what you're doing when you are working with open source. Just to illustrate the importance of this community worldwide right now, in 2020, GitHub reached 56 million developers, and it will grow over the next years to 100 million developers. And they had just in 2020, almost 2 billion commits or contributions to projects. And the graph on the right side is showing the growth of communities and projects because of the COVID. And this is very interesting because the three most important topics for new projects are Python, artificial intelligence, and COVID, which means that people start working together, trying to help us to solve this whole mess based on data and artificial intelligence. And the good news is open source is viral. So when you start contributing, you start working with it, you can't stop anymore. So most of those guys that went to communities, started contributing to projects, trying to help the humanity or the whole world to get out of the situation that we are right now using technology and science, probably will stay. So this is the number of contributors that we have only on GitHub. I'm not considering other similar websites or people share projects. And here is where those developers are located right now. So as you can see, the vast majority is North America, Europe, and Asia, which means that if you're starting an open source project right now, if you want to capture the innovation as I mentioned, you can't look only to your neighborhood. See, Latin America, 4.9% only. And this is a weird fact because next year, we're going to surpass Japan, Brazil going to surpass Japan, and will be the fifth country in number of developers in the world. So you're going to have US, India, China, I believe Germany, and then Brazil. And also India will surpass US in a couple of years. So this is something that it's really shameful for us how to explain to people that we have the 50 biggest developer community, but our whole continent in Latin America just contributes 4.9. And this is weird because if you see the statistics of usage of open source, we are heavy users. So we need to change our own mindset from the state that I used to say that we were digitally colonized to start creating technology because the world is open for us to do that. So if you want to connect with the world and capture innovation, you need to connect to the whole world because people are not here in our neighborhood. And also, if you want to find contributors for your next project on open source, you need to engage with communities on those three regions specifically. There's another interesting survey made by TidalLeaf last year asking why companies use open source. And on the early beginning, first reason was cost. And now we can see that it's still there, but they also said that it increases efficiency of applications development and maintenance, eliminate vendor lock-in, developer satisfaction, and all other things regarding to quality, security, and speed. So open source also reduce costs in general, but this is just one reason of the top reasons why people and companies are adopting. And then I'm going to ask you how the company works or the company you want use open source today. And this is fun because since I started talking a lot about open source on early 2020 in public, I've been talking with executives from different companies, different size companies, different levels, and I ask them those questions, and most of them say, hey, we don't use open source. And then I show them this statistic here from TidalLeaf. 92% of professional applications contains open source components today. Exactly. Gustavo just commented, I believe many people use open source tools without knowing. Yes, and also companies does that. And I'm going to tell you about the implications of using open source without understanding what you're doing. And when we look at the applications today, this is very interesting because 10% of the source code of the applications are infrastructure based on open source, 70% are frameworks, libraries, and other components. And what companies are really writing and developing today is like 20% of the software. This is why we have so much innovation. This is why we have so much software being produced and so many options today, because companies need to focus on what they need to deliver, on the value for the customer, on their expertise, on solve the right problem, not just looking at technology and writing everything from scratch. And this is very important. So companies today basically writes 20% of the code. The rest is open source. What I'm gonna learn here is, do you really know what you are doing with open source? Because it's not that easy to understand. So typically, if you want more references, you can look for documentation about open source program offices. I recommend the opensource.google.com because they publish the whole policy of open source inside Google and it's public to understand how they address in a huge company those issues. So basically, there are a few questions that need to be answered. So first of all, how does the company control the licenses of the components it consumes? Because, as I said before, it's not because something on the internet, you can just use it and it's okay, because there is a license behind it. So there are licenses that are viral. And if you use this component, you need to open source your own code. There are licenses that has what I call dual licensing, which means that you can use the software for free for academics purpose or for personal use. But if you put this in a commercial application, you need to pay a fee. And this fee varies. And I collected several histories over the past years from companies that use those kind of dual licensing components on their solutions. The owner of the component saw that, just sit down, grab a pot of popcorn, start eating, and counting the number of downloads that tool has. In a moment where the bill was reaching millions of dollars, then they just send the lawyer and say, hey guys, you are using my component, here's the license, so you owe me those $1 million of license fees and you can do an agreement. So this is happening right now. And also we have companies that were traditionally working with open source, but then they decided to change the license recently, and they are using licenses that are not approved by the open source initiative. One of those companies is Elastic, and Elasticsearch is used by several companies. And right now, if you want to use Elasticsearch, you need to pay for Elastic, or you need to make your own code open source. And this is a huge impact for enterprises, for companies all over the world. But the cool thing about the open source community is that it's auto-cleaning. So what developers did, they just grabbed the latest version of Elasticsearch that was really open source. They forked the project. Now it's named OpenSearch. And there are several companies working with OpenSearch. So this kind of model is really fun. Just go to the OpenSearch website and you will find who are the companies that are behind it, and you're gonna get surprised. And the funny thing about it is that if Elastic builds any new functionality for their closed version or their you need to pay version, the community goes there and replicates on the open source side. And Gustav is asking if there are no examples of MySQL. The same is happening over the years. Every time they had this duality or special features launched by the internal, the commercial version, the community just go there and replicate. And also the same happens on MongoDB ecosystem. There are companies building features that you need to pay. The community just go there and replicate off these. And I will explain why they are doing this and why the ecosystem is important for that, okay? So the second thing is, after you read about all your licenses and you know what you're consuming, how do you monitor the evolution of those dependencies? Because maybe your business depends on an open source project that will be discontinued next year. Maybe you're using a special feature of a library that will be deprecated and your application will stop working. So if you are using open source components on your solution, it means that you depend on that. And how do you monitor this dependency? And more than this, how do you contribute for this evolution? Because there is the place where the innovation will happen. You can appropriate it very easily, learn a new feature, contribute with a new feature, or help people to brainstorm around the problem. And they will solve the problem on the library with hundreds of developers contributing. And you don't need to invest hundreds of your developers to work on that. Okay, so there's different forms to contribute with open source. You can leave source code, you can help on documentation, on tutorials, on marketing, on advertise, and depending on the company, you can even hire them for support or services that will help and allow this whole ecosystem to start working and evolving. So it's important because if you depend on the software, somehow you need to contribute for it to still existing. One good case that I have about this kind of thing is OpenSSL, when you have the Heartbleed bug a few years ago that broke all the cryptography over HTTP on the internet. The world got really scared and everyone rushed to the open source project, OpenSSL, that was the base used by billions of users. And they realized that this project was maintained by 3 guys. One guy on vacations, one guy with a lot of work, the other guy sick. The world stopped, the internet stopped working because billions of people rely on the individual contributions of 3 guys. Now they have a better structure. I think they are 5 or 6 right now. They are being paid for do that, but just a case, the whole world had dependency with one specific library that was written and maintained by 3 people. Okay, so also you need to take care about what your employees are doing with open source. How do you monitor or guide your employees about their open source contributors? Because maybe they don't know all the things I'm talking about, and they think it's okay if they grab a snippet of your code and contribute it to a project, or maybe grab a snippet of the code that your company is producing to a customer and put it as an open source project. And also maybe they are getting snippets of code with licenses that don't allow that inside your own products. And this could be a huge issue. So good start point, ask your developers if they contribute to projects, go there, check the licenses, and do some orientation for them on how to make good contributions, because in the end, those contributions are in public. And if they are contributing with ugly code, and your company states that you just write perfect code, it's weird. So this guy sent this ugly code to this project, but how this company that pays him to develop during the days says that they have a high bar on technical quality. So it's important to monitor and to orientate people on that. The CEO of the company I work now that just said, before you send a pull request, double check and ask yourself, would you be proud to show to your mom the code you just sent to the repo? And this is the bar that we need to have, okay? We need to be proud to show to our moms the code we are sending to repos. Doesn't matter if it's internal or external. Also, there are companies starting to see open source as a new opportunity and said, hey, I'm going to open the projects. I'm going to open this library. I'm going to create a new open source project. And the first question is, why? Because opening a project is not just making a GitHub repository public. You need to check the licenses, you need to check IP, you need to check the copyright of the code, you need to have things like developer certificate of origin or a CLA to allow contributions to come with the right copyright transfer. In Brazil specifically, we don't have patents for software, but we have copyright. So you need to comply with those rules. And also, what do you want with this project? Why are you opening? You want to foster innovation and grab a community? Are you ready to invest on building this community for the next 4 or 5 years? Because this is what it takes to have a community. It's nothing magical that you just open a repo today and in 2 days you have 1 million of users and 200,000 contributors. So you need to have a strategy. No, I'm just doing this because of marketing. So how are you going to use it in marketing? How are you going to measure your success? No, I'm just opening because I want a better word. Okay, if you want a better word, there's another strategy. So depending on what you want with open, what your purpose for creating an open source project, it means that you need to commit on the long term. You need to invest. You need to have the right people to do the right work, because nothing is worse than a company creating an open source project and abandoning it on the next 2 or 3 years, because this gives a huge sign to the community that this company is not committed with the community at all. Also, if you don't behave fine with the community, what you want is a fork of your project. Developers move to the fork and you'll be on an empty room. This is why open source is doing right now. We have LibreOffice that I worked with in the past that has the same situation. So it's not that easy to create and grow an open source project. It costs money, it costs time and dedication. So think twice, why are you deciding to do that? And finally, how do you use the same techniques that we have for content and code and idea sharing on the open source community inside your company to write your own private projects? This is called inner source. There is an institution called Inner Source Commons. innersourcecommons.org, that they are helping people and helping developers and companies all over the world to understand and use those best practices inside. There are companies that are like PayPal, like Bosch, and several others. This institution, one of the leaders is Dennis Cooper. She was the first open source program officer for Sun Microsystems. She worked on different companies, including Intel. And the guys there are really helping people to understand how to use inner source and to get benefits of it. Okay, so go there, check the best practices, and they are totally open to help anyone to start using inner source. Because remember, the things I said about the brilliant minds be outside and the innovation be outside, it happens not only outside of your company, but inside. Maybe the issue that you are trying to solve over the next 2 or 3 days or 2 or 2 weeks, you have the best developer to solve this, but he's on another squad. He's working on another project, and maybe he's even not happy there. And you have on your hands the right challenge for the developer to keep him on your company. So using inner source is key for that. And I've been following some companies that are using inner source, and I've seen amazing things happening with the right people solving the right problems. And we have in this idea of a bigger community and let's say corporate knowledge sharing through technology using inner source. And this is not utopia, because if you see what happens on the market today, we have what we call competition, which means collaboration plus competition. Linux kernel is probably the biggest sample of this, because you have there companies like Intel, AMD, and ARM. Those companies compete very, very aggressively on the hardware market, but when it's about software and Linux, it's like the sea where the tide lifts up, all the boats goes up. So this is why they are working together to create better solutions. The same for the telco companies. You have NEC, you have Alcatel, you have other telco companies that find hard on the markets for to sell their products, but they work together to develop a better version of Linux for telecom. And if you go to the list of companies that are working with Linux Foundation, you see exactly that. And this is the amount of commits they have daily on the Linux Foundation. So imagine there are weeks that they have 2,000 commits on the Linux kernel. Imagine the number of developers and innovations that you need to pay to have this kind of thing. So this is really happening right now. And you may ask, well, how those companies make money with open source? So back on those early days, the money was made basically by service, support, and training. We have companies like Red Hat that started like that. Then we have a second phase where they created the open core model, which means that I'm opening this part of the open source. I'm going to talk about this later, but you have this enterprise version here, and I will monetize through this enterprise version and my services. And nowadays, it's much more common to have managed clouds, which means that I open the core of this project. You can download it and use at your own risk, or you can pay me. I will host your services. I will take care about everything for you. One example of this course is one forum for general technical communities. And they offers you the whole product. You can download and have your own server running, or you just pay, I think, $100 per month. And then they host and take care about everything for you. This is, by the way, what I use at Zoop on our open source forum. And the open core model is key for that, because the idea is I open what is core for this whole thing. And this will allow a vibrant ecosystem to growth around it. So I can have my open core being used by another open source product that you have there, its own community of companies and users and contributors at all. I can have my open core being used by a company that is selling a proprietary product and making money and generating jobs with that, and it's okay. I can have a company that use my open core to create services and sell those services. So this is really good because the more people I have, depending on the core I open it, more people will end up contributing with that, with my open core, because it becomes vital for this whole ecosystem, and it creates a very important way of developing, capturing innovation, and generate revenue. And those, I listed some examples like Facebook, HashiCorp, Confluent, Oracle, and even Elastic worked with this open core versions. And just to illustrate how much money we have from that, this is an idea of what companies made last year. So we are talking about companies that are making billions of dollars based on open core and open source. And this is very important because it generates jobs, it distributes money, it allows people to still working with open source, and it creates a very vibrant ecosystem that really moves technology forward. If you want to learn more about Zoop open source projects, this is our website. Unfortunately, the landing page is only in Portuguese. We're going to launch the English versions over the next days. We just changed this, and the guys didn't finish up the English version yet. But if you check here on products, you'll see each one of our open source projects. All of them are the landing page, the documentation, the repos are in English too. So you can just go there, get more information about the projects. We made projects that change the way people develops and deliver software, and we built a framework for companies to become hypothesis-driven companies. Hypothesis-driven development is important, but we need to have hypothesis-driven companies to be able to get the pace of technology the way our customers want. So my time is over. If you have any questions, any comments, anything else you want to know about this, this is my the way you find me on all social media networks. Just send me a message. It will be a pleasure to talk to you.